The city beneath you shimmered, a jewel of impossible architecture, when the tranquil hum of your life shattered into a million digital shards. You are an elite chrononaut, a guardian of the timelines, accustomed to the silent hum of eternity, to the delicate balance of cause and effect that underpins all existence. Your comms unit, usually a discreet whisper of cosmic events, screamed. It wasn't a warning. It was a primal shriek of impending temporal collapse, a critical temporal anomaly index spike that dwarfed anything recorded in the annals of Chronos history. Off the charts. Impossible. Panic, a sensation you rarely permit yourself, tightened its grip, a cold knot in your stomach as you grappled with the sheer magnitude of the alert. This wasn't a minor ripple, a localized tremor in the fabric of time. This was an earthquake, a seismic event threatening to tear reality asunder. You immediately initiated an emergency jump. The familiar disorientation of temporal displacement, a small comfort compared to the existential dread that now gnawed at your resolve. The world blurred, then coalesced around you, depositing you directly into the sterile, hyper-efficient heart of Chronos Command. Your supervisor, Director Thorne, a man whose face was usually a mask of stoic calm, was a whirlwind of frantic energy, his brow furrowed with an intensity you had never witnessed. Holographic projections flickered around him, displaying chaotic temporal energy signatures emanating from a single, impossibly precise point in the past. He explained, his voice strained with urgency, that a delicate thread in the grand tapestry of history, a single, almost imperceptible shift in a pivotal moment, now threatened to unravel everything you knew, everything you were, everything humanity had ever achieved. The very foundation of your present, of your future, was cracking under an unseen force. London, 1888, he stated, his gaze piercing, specifically the autumn of that year. An anomaly has taken root there, not a cataclysmic event, but a subtle, insidious change that, if left unchecked, will rewrite our entire timeline, erasing us from existence as surely as a cosmic eraser. He handed you a datapad, its surface glowing with intricate historical data, profiles of key figures, and potential flashpoints. Your mission was clear, terrifyingly precise, and yet maddeningly vague. Identify the source of this temporal cancer, neutralize it, and restore the timeline. There was no room for error, no second chances. The fate of everything hinged on your success, on your ability to navigate the treacherous currents of the past and mend the broken threads of time. You were the last line of defense, the only hope against an oblivion that stretched across the ages. One moment, you were standing in the gleaming, pristine halls of Chronos Command. The next, the world spun into a vortex of swirling colors and deafening temporal static. Then, with a jarring lurch, you materialized in a suffocating, inky blackness, the air thick with the acrid stench of coal smoke, damp earth, and something vaguely metallic, a smell that clung to your nostrils and refused to dissipate. This was London, 1888. The transition, usually seamless, was rough, jarring your teeth and sending a jolt of pain through your temporal unit. A series of alarming beeps and frantic warnings erupted from the device strapped to your wrist, its usually reassuring glow now flickering erratically. The temporal displacement field collapsed prematurely, a violent expulsion of raw energy that left you sprawling on the slick refuse-strewn cobblestones of a narrow alleyway. You scrambled to your feet, your body protesting the sudden impact, your mind reeling from the abrupt cessation of temporal travel. Your temporal unit, your lifeline, your primary means of returning to your own time, was critically damaged. Its display was a chaotic mess of static and garbled error messages, its once reliable functions now sputtering into intermittent bursts of uselessness. You were stranded, a chrononaut marooned in a bygone era, with only partially functional technology to guide you. The cold, biting wind, carrying the distant clang of horse-drawn carriages and the muffled shouts of unseen figures, bit through your advanced chronosuit, a stark reminder of your vulnerability. The weight of your predicament pressed down on you, a suffocating blanket of isolation and dread. You were alone, truly alone, in a time utterly alien to your own, with the monumental task of saving your future resting solely on your compromised shoulders. The immediate priority was survival, then concealment. You quickly activated your suit's chameleon protocols, its sleek metallic surface rippling and shifting, transforming into the rough, drab wool of a common laborer's coat and trousers. Your futuristic comms device, miraculously still functional for basic internal communication and data access, was quickly concealed beneath your sleeve. Blending in was paramount. Any anachronistic detail could trigger further temporal instability, or, worse, draw unwanted attention from the locals, who would undoubtedly find your appearance unsettling. You emerged from the grimy alleyway, stepping into the oppressive, pea-soupy fog that clung to the gaslit streets like a shroud. The air was heavy, pungent with the smells of horse manure, stale beer, and damp soot. A stark contrast to the sterile, filtered atmosphere of your own time. You began to wander, a ghost in a city of shadows, your senses overwhelmed by the sheer, unbridled chaos of 19th century London. The ceaseless clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the shouts of street vendors hawking their wares, the guttural laughter spilling from dimly lit pubs. It was a symphony of an era long past, a jarring assault on your carefully calibrated chrononaut sensibilities. As you navigated the labyrinthine streets, you began to pick up snippets of conversation, fragments of hushed whispers that sent a chill down your spine. The names of victims, the gruesome details of unsolved crimes, the palpable fear in the voices of passers-by, it all painted a chilling picture. The newspapers, their headlines screaming of terror and brutality, confirmed your growing suspicion. The Whitechapel murders. The very mention of the name sent a ripple of unease through you. This wasn't just a simple historical anomaly. This was something far more sinister, far more deeply entrenched than Director Thorne had initially indicated. The sheer scale of the fear, the pervasive sense of dread that hung over the city like a pall, suggested a temporal disruption of immense proportions. You realized with a sickening certainty that the anomaly, whatever its true nature, was inextricably linked to these horrors. The subtle shift Director Thorne spoke of wasn't just a change in a historical footnote. It was a fundamental alteration, a dark shadow cast over the entire era, one that now threatened to consume your future. Your mission, already daunting, had just become exponentially more complex, more dangerous, and infinitely more personal. The true battle for your timeline had only just begun, and you were its sole, unprepared champion. With your temporal unit crippled and communication with Chronos Command impossible, you were effectively cut off, an island in an ocean of the past. Your only resources were your highly trained intellect, your encyclopedic knowledge of history, and the limited, partially functional data stored within your comms unit. You began to piece together the puzzle, meticulously sifting through archived news articles, police reports, and historical accounts, seeking any discrepancy, any subtle deviation from the established timeline. You moved through the teeming, gaslit streets like a phantom, a silent observer in a world oblivious to its impending doom. Your investigation led you down dark alleys and into smoky taverns, to the grimy docks where goods from across the empire were unloaded, and to the bustling markets where secrets were traded as freely as gossip. You questioned wary informants, adopting a convincingly gruff demeanor and an appropriate accent, a skill honed during countless temporal incursions. You listened intently to the whispers of the working class, the anxieties of the shopkeepers, and the pronouncements of the self-proclaimed experts. Each conversation was a thread, each observation a potential clue in the intricate tapestry of the anomaly. You encountered a bewildering array of suspicious personalities, a charismatic yet unsettling spiritualist who claimed to commune with the dead, his eyes holding a disturbing glint of knowing. A brilliant but eccentric physician, obsessed with the inner workings of the human mind, whose theories bordered on the macabre. And a reclusive, aristocratic scholar whose vast knowledge of ancient cults and forgotten rituals seemed oddly pertinent to the unfolding horror. Each interaction was a delicate dance, a careful probing for information without revealing your true nature, without disturbing the delicate balance of the past any further. Danger became your constant companion. One night, while shadowing a particularly shifty character through the labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel, you found yourself cornered by a group of menacing thugs, their faces obscured by shadow, their intentions clear. Your chronosuit's defensive capabilities, though limited without full power, still offered a degree of protection. You moved with a speed and precision alien to the era, deflecting blows, disabling your attackers with swift, calculated movements, and disappearing back into the fog-laden night before they could fully comprehend what had transpired. Another time, you narrowly avoided a confrontation with a particularly zealous constable. His suspicion piqued by your unusual attire and seemingly out-of-place inquiries. You had to think on your feet, improvising a plausible backstory and feigning a convincing level of intoxication to deflect his scrutiny. The pressure was immense, a constant, gnawing anxiety that threatened to overwhelm your focus. Every step was a gamble, every decision a potential trigger for catastrophic temporal consequences. Yet, you pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of your entire timeline rested upon your shoulders, a burden that grew heavier with each passing moment. Days bled into weeks, the oppressive atmosphere of London, 1888, becoming a suffocating second skin. The clues, initially disparate and seemingly unrelated, began to coalesce into a chillingly coherent pattern. It wasn't a grand conspiracy, not a single cataclysmic event that had triggered the temporal anomaly. The true source was far more insidious, far more subtle, and in its own way, far more terrifying. You finally pieced together the fragments of information, the whispered fears, the historical discrepancies, and the strange, almost imperceptible shifts in the local narrative. The anomaly wasn't a single event, but a person. Not a world leader, not a scientific genius whose invention would irrevocably alter the course of history, but an ordinary man whose seemingly insignificant actions, repeated with an almost compulsive regularity, were slowly but surely diverging the timeline. His name was Arthur Finch, a meticulous, unassuming clerk in a minor government office, a man whose life, by all historical accounts, should have been utterly unremarkable. Yet, in this altered timeline, his routine, his choices, his very presence had become a cancerous growth, subtly shifting the probabilities, nudging the course of events onto a different, darker path. You discovered that Arthur Finch, driven by a deeply personal tragedy, the premature death of his young daughter, an event that, in the original timeline, had not occurred, had developed an obsession. An obsession with order, with control, with preventing any further loss. His seemingly benign efforts to improve his immediate environment, to optimize minor bureaucratic processes, to guide certain individuals towards what he perceived as better choices, were having a butterfly effect. Each small alteration, each subtle manipulation, was creating ripples, then waves, then tsunamis of change across the temporal ocean. His intervention, for example, in a trivial dispute between two minor politicians, had prevented a crucial alliance from forming, an alliance that, in the original timeline, had led to the passage of a critical public health bill. Without that bill, disease had spread unchecked, leading to widespread social unrest and a chain of events that culminated in a far more brutal and prolonged global conflict in the early 20th century. The Whitechapel murders, you now understood, were not the anomaly itself, but a symptom, a consequence of the rising tide of despair and lawlessness that Finch's subtle manipulations had inadvertently unleashed. The realization hit you with the force of a physical blow. You weren't here to prevent a bomb from detonating or a dictator from rising. You were here to confront a man whose good intentions, warped by grief and an insatiable need for control, were slowly but systematically destroying your future. The enormity of it was staggering. You understood now that you could not simply reverse an event. You had to confront the source, the very heart of this creeping, insidious change. You had to confront Arthur Finch directly, and somehow stop him from continuing his well-intentioned, timeline-shattering crusade. The weight of this new understanding pressed down on you, heavier than any physical burden you had ever carried. The path forward was clear, but the moral implications were a labyrinth of impossible choices. You finally cornered Arthur Finch in his small, meticulously organized study, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. He was hunched over a ledger, his precise handwriting filling the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he looked up, his eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, held a surprising mix of weariness and fervent conviction. He didn't seem surprised to see you, almost as if he had been expecting someone, though certainly not a chrononaut from the distant future. The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire humming with unspoken truths. You laid out your case, calmly, methodically, explaining the temporal consequences of his seemingly innocuous actions, the devastating ripples his grief-driven desire for control had sent through the fabric of time. He listened, his head cocked slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he began to speak, his voice soft but unwavering, and what he revealed chilled you to your core. His daughter, Mary, had died of a preventable illness, a consequence of the very conditions you now witnessed in London. In his timeline, the one he now sought to mend, her death had been a catalyst, a brutal awakening to the systemic injustices and inefficiencies that plagued his society. But unlike the original timeline, where her death had spurred a different kind of reform, a slow, organic change, his grief had manifested differently. He didn't just want to prevent further loss. He wanted to perfect the world, to eliminate all suffering, all chaos, all chance. He believed he was saving lives, improving the future, creating a utopia, one carefully orchestrated detail at a time. His motives were, in their own twisted way, profoundly sympathetic. He wasn't malicious. He was a man consumed by love and loss, convinced he was doing good. "You speak of timelines," he said, his gaze fixed on yours. "But what of suffering? What of the children who starve, the families who perish from preventable plagues, the wars that consume generations? My daughter died because the world was imperfect. I am simply trying to make it better. For everyone." He gestured around his study, at the stacks of meticulously organized documents, the carefully annotated maps, the intricate charts outlining social reforms and economic adjustments. Every intervention, every subtle alteration, has been a step towards a more just, a more peaceful, a more enlightened future. Your future, perhaps, is one of complacent stagnation, a future built on the very suffering I seek to eradicate. His words struck a chord, a dissonant truth that resonated with a part of you. His logic, while flawed from a temporal perspective, was undeniably human, undeniably compassionate. Yet, you knew the catastrophic consequences of his actions. His improvements were not creating a utopia. They were unraveling the very fabric of existence, replacing your complex, imperfect, but ultimately thriving timeline with an unrecognizable, horrifying alternate reality. You were faced with an impossible choice: allow his well-intentioned destruction to continue, or forcibly intervene, knowing that in doing so, you would be extinguishing the desperate hope of a grieving father, undoing his attempts to create what he believed was a better world. The weight of this decision, the moral ambiguity of it, was almost unbearable. You, a guardian of time, were now forced to be its executioner, to crush the dreams of a man who believed he was a savior. The confrontation with Arthur Finch was a crucible, a moment of profound moral reckoning that tested the very core of your chrononaut training. You didn't resort to force, not immediately. Instead, you appealed to his intellect, to his meticulous nature, presenting him with irrefutable temporal projections, simulations of the true, devastating future his corrections were forging. You showed him the cascading failures, the unforeseen cataclysms, the ultimate collapse of humanity that his utopian vision would inevitably usher in. It was a brutal, agonizing process, peeling back the layers of his self-deception, forcing him to confront the dark reality of his unintended legacy. Finally, with a broken sob that tore at your own resolve, he understood. The weight of his actions, the true horror of the future he was creating, crushed him. He agreed to cease his interventions, to retreat into the quiet anonymity of his original historical path, to allow fate, however cruel, to take its course. The relief that washed over you was immense, but it was tinged with a deep, pervasive sorrow for the man you had just forced to abandon his life's work, his desperate attempt to mend a broken heart. You felt the timeline begin to stabilize, a subtle shift, a gentle snap back into place, like a displaced bone resetting itself. The chaotic temporal energy signatures you had seen at Chronos Command slowly receded, the anomaly index dropping back to safe, stable levels. The Whitechapel murders, in the revised historical record that instantly updated in your comms unit, were still a dark stain on London's history, but their ripple effects on the larger timeline were contained, isolated. You had succeeded. You had restored your timeline, but not without personal cost. The encounter with Finch had left an indelible mark, a lingering question about the true nature of good and evil, of free will versus predestination, that would haunt you long after your return. With your mission accomplished, you activated the emergency temporal beacon, its faint signal piercing through the temporal static, a desperate plea for extraction. The energy required for a full temporal jump was still beyond your damaged unit, but a localized short-range extraction was now possible. As the familiar shimmer of the Chronos retrieval beam began to coalesce around you, promising a return to your own time, your gaze drifted back to Finch's study. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands, a defeated figure against the backdrop of his once proud, now shattered work. And then you saw it, a small, innocuous detail, almost imperceptible, lying on his desk. Amidst the carefully cataloged papers and ledgers, a single, pristine digital watch, its sleek metallic casing glinting faintly in the dim gaslight. It was utterly anachronistic, a piece of technology far beyond anything that could exist in 1888. It wasn't one of your devices. It was a model you had never seen before, yet unmistakably from a future far more advanced than your own. Your blood ran cold. You hadn't brought it. Finch certainly hadn't possessed it. It was impossible. Yet, there it was, stark and undeniable. A new anomaly. A subtle ripple, perhaps, but one that screamed of an external, unknown interference. Someone else had been here. Someone else had touched this timeline. And in that horrifying moment, as the retrieval beam enveloped you, whisking you away from 1888 London, a chilling realization solidified in your mind. Arthur Finch, the man you had just corrected, was not the true source of the original anomaly. He was merely a pawn, a carefully placed catalyst, and the real chrononaut, the true manipulator, was still out there, hiding in the temporal shadows, orchestrating an infinitely larger, far more dangerous game. And you, the supposed guardian of time, had just become an unwitting part of their grand design, leaving behind a subtle, yet profound, new temporal scar.